Penn State, Ohio State has a ring to it, always has, always will probably. And of course, it does about tenfold on this season, 2024. We've been looking forward to this one in Happy Valley. The Nittany Lions are undefeated. We got Marty Leap here from Penn State Rivals. Get on over there, check out Marty's work, Penn State Rivals. Marty, we talk football with you all year, but there's only a few of these, and this actually may be the one on the Penn State calendar most years that's kind of takes preeminence over everything else.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, it's a lot of things. I mean, first and foremost, I think a big part of it is, as a program in the Big Ten, Ohio State is who you yearn to be, right? You want to be the best. You want to be atop the conference. You want to win the conference. And even with what Michigan's done the last 3 years, now that Jim Harbaugh has moved on to the NFL, I think it's safe to say that, Ohio State once again has asserted itself as that top program in the Big Ten. I mean, Oregon may challenge that in time, but Ohio State is who you want to be if you're a Big Ten program. And then you factor in the fact that Penn State has only beaten Ohio State once in the now 9 years James Franklin's been here. And I think what makes it even more painful for Penn State fans is they could easily have 4 or 5 victories over the Buckeyes in that time, right? Two fourth quarter meltdowns that led to 1-point losses, a double overtime loss with just horrific officiating mixed in, blew a fourth quarter lead at home against Ohio State 2 years ago. So while James Franklin only has 1 win against the Buckeyes, he could easily have 4 or 5. So I think that's always a big factor too. But yeah, this is always one that's circled on the calendar every year and has produced some instant classics in the last decade. And, you look ahead to Saturday, it's kind of crazy to say, but I didn't even believe this at first. I had to double check. It's the first top 5 matchup at Beaver Stadium but since 1999, which is wild. So yeah, this is a huge game. It's going to have the eyes of the college football world on it. If history is any indication what's to come, probably going to be one of the games of the year in the Big Ten, if not nationally, and definitely going to have big ramifications on both the Big Ten title race and the college football playoff.
I'm guessing 1999 would have been against Michigan.
It was against Arizona. Season.
Oh, I do remember that game, but I would have never come up with that.
48-7, something like that. They just absolutely waxed them. Yes. So, yeah, that was the last time 2 top 5 teams played at Beaver Stadium. So to me, I read that the other day. I'm like, this can't be right. I'm like looking at past schedules. I figured between Ohio State and Michigan, at least once, both of them had to be in the top 5 since then. But sure enough, they have not been.
So before we get to the Penn State side of things, whether you saw it on Saturday or have looked at it since, these struggles by Ohio State's offensive line in particular, the team struggled in various areas throughout this game against Nebraska, but it was largely focused on the offensive line. For a defensive front as good as Penn State's, that has to increase the level of hope.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the biggest things with this matchup is if you look at where Penn State has an advantage, the defensive line might be the strongest, deepest group on this team. And the biggest question mark for Ohio State's their offensive line, like you said. So that's a good matchup for the Nittany Lions. You don't know if you're going to have denied Dennis Sutton on Saturday. I mean, I know both teams are dealing with a ton of injuries right now. And that's part of the reason why Ohio State has their offensive line woes is they're down to their third left tackle, who's a guard that got kicked out the tackle. And but even without Dennis Sutton, this defensive line is still really good. It's really deep. You saw it on Saturday against Wisconsin. In the second half, when Dennis Sutton played all of 1 snap, the defensive line completely dominated and took over that game and helped spark their rally. So I think if you're Penn State, you've got to feel really good about that because what you do, your absolute best, just unleashing that defensive front, unleashing that defensive line led by Abdul Carter and Zane Durant is what Ohio State struggles with most. So I think that you've got to feel really good about that matchup going into this game if you're Penn State.
Yeah, you're facing arguably the most talented group of playmakers in the country, but if they can't block, then it changes play calling for Chip Kelly. It inhibits their ability to get guys downfield because they just don't have the time. It completely, again, changes the whole map. And Nebraska is a decent defense, but they're not in Penn State's league by any measurement. And so, yeah, there's an intriguing matchup right there with Penn State's defense, of course, playing so well against Ohio State's front. And then, the playmakers. But if Ohio State's able to reasonably block up front, I know that you've had some questions about and concerns about Penn State's linebackers. When you look at the back seven, what are your overall thoughts against Ohio State's weapons?
Yeah, I think it's a concern. This is by far the best group of receivers they've faced all year. And we saw them struggle at times against USC. Now, a lot of the struggles against USC were guys being over aggressive, over pursuing, and Lincoln Riley, to his credit, taking advantage of that with play calling. So I'm sure that's something they're going to address this week. But yeah, that's a concern. I mean, late in the game on Saturday, AJ Harris, your top corner, left. Now it looked like, it was 28-13, like 2 minutes left. To look like he took a knee down low, and it was one of those, hey, you know what, just go ahead and set the rest of this one out. We've got it in the bag, but not for certain. Obviously, as we've discussed before, you don't have KJ Winston. So there's some concerns there. And at linebacker, Tony Rojas, who you expected to be your best linebacker coming into the year, has flashed some really good things this year, but is essentially playing with one shoulder right now. And, a linebacker, that's hard to do. I mean, credit to the kid for playing through it and still playing at a good level, but he hasn't been at that super high level I think you expected, but I think it's because of the injury. So I do think that's an area Ohio State could look to exploit. I'm sure that's an area Ryan Day is going to look to exploit, but it goes back to our conversation. You can have Jeremiah Smith or Emeka Buka running around wide open. If Will Howard doesn't have time to throw the ball, it doesn't matter. So I think if you're Penn State, and knowing what Tom Allen likes to do, and knowing, just even back to his days in Indiana, the kind of defenses he would run, I'm guessing he's going to trust his guys in that back end to hold up in coverage long enough to where his front four can get home, especially in a game where I think going in, he's going to view that as a big advantage for them. But I do think, if you're Penn State and you look at how this game plays out, I think if Ohio State wins, I think you probably look at 2 or 3 big chunk plays they hit in the passing game that are probably keys to that. I think that's something Ohio State's going to have to win this game, largely because, too, I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball with success against Penn State. I mean, like you said, no knocking Nebraska's defense. That's a good defense, top half of the Big Ten defense, but they're not as good as Penn State's. With Penn State, you're talking probably a top 10 to 15 group nationally, and Ohio State only averaged 2.2 yards per carry against Nebraska, so I don't see them being able to run on Penn State that well. I think that's where Howard and your receivers are going to have to step up and make a play for you if you're Ohio State.
And that 2.7 yards per carry between Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, really, not that they can't play better, but they might be the best backfield in the country. Mm-hmm. It was not them. They do just fine when they get the blocks. That was just one of those games where, usually the offensive line pops up every so often for the average viewer watching the ball, but it was just like that guy, wow, he's getting thrown in Will Howard's lap every play or into a back's lap as well, trying to run the football. So, yeah, boy, it's going to be interesting to see that matchup, because if Penn State dominates that matchup, then my goodness, and it has the potential to go that way. Please like the video and subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football, everybody. Check out Marty's work at Penn State Rivals, of course. And I can just about guarantee that anybody that clicked on this video would have lost a bet, because they would have assumed the first thing we were going to talk about was Drew Aller and Bo Prabula. But that was not the case. So I did not listen to James Franklin's news conference, but I did talk to an Ohio State guy, did a record just like I am with you, who had just watched it. And my advice for James Franklin, not that he listens to me or needs to, because I thought it was pretty obvious, you don't, regardless of their health of the two guys, you make Ohio State game plan for both of them. Not that Prabula doesn't play anyway in certain packages, but you make them prepare for both.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm assuming that's what we're going to do, right? I'm assuming that's what James is going to look to do, because he was very non-committal. He said that, it's going to come right up to game time before they make their decision on who's going to start a quarterback. And, they may know right now. I'm sure there's a good shot they do know right now whether or not Drew Aller is going to be able to play. And I'm sure nobody else is going to know until the first time Penn State's offense trots out on the field on Saturday. And like you said, we're probably going to see both regardless, because you've already seen plenty of Bo Prabula this year in the packages that they've had some success with. You look at the highlight touchdown Tyler Warren had against USC where he lined up at center. That was a Bo Prabula package, because that's who he snapped the ball to. But yeah, you want to make Ohio State have to prepare for both, because Bo Prabula is much different than Drew Aller. I mean, Bo is more of what you expect, I think, in the Andy Kotelnicki offense. Not saying he's Jalen Daniels, because when Jalen Daniels is healthy, he's kind of in a league of his own, I feel. But much similar player where, dual threat, can run the ball really well. And that's part of how they dominated the second half against Wisconsin on Saturday after the offense kind of sputtered a little bit when he first came into the game. Once they got going, Wisconsin had to respect his legs a lot, which really opened up the RPO game, was able to make a couple impressive throws that I did not expect to see from him. And in the second half, I believe him, Katron Allen, and Nicholas Singleton all averaged over 5 yards per carry. It was Allen averaging almost 8 yards per carry. So they got the running game going. Again, I think we're going to see both. I will say, I think if you're Penn State, not to sound overly obvious, but you want Drew Aller to be able to play. A, you want your starting quarterback. And B, I think, looking at the Ohio State defense, where they can be had is as good as this secondary was supposed to be coming into the year. They struggled against Oregon. And even last week against Nebraska, there was a couple times Dylan Raiola had wide open guys that he missed. So I think that deep pass, even those 15 to 20 yard chunk plays that Penn State's really built their offense on this year. I mean, they're I think a lot of people don't realize this. They're fourth in the country in explosive passing rate. And it hasn't been the deep bombs. It's just they're consistently getting 15, 20, 25 yards. So I think that's where Ohio State can be susceptible. And not a knock on Bo Prabula, but you and I've talked about it a bunch the last few years. There's a few quarterbacks in the country with the pure arm talent and strength that Drew Aller has. So you want him out there to try and take advantage of that. But I mean, you watched Saturday against Wisconsin. It didn't look terrible when he got hurt. He seemed to be moving fine on the sidelines. So I'm assuming he's going to give it a go, especially being a kid from Ohio. The kind of season he's having, you have a hard time seeing him coming back to college for a fourth year. So he knows this is probably his last shot to beat the Buckeyes. I am willing to bet he's going to give everything he can to play in this game. But at the same time, something that I think you need to factor in there is in the 12-team playoff era, you don't have to beat Ohio State to make the playoff. If they lose Saturday, you have 4 remaining games. You're going to be a 10-plus point favorite in all of them. Take care of business. You're still going to the playoff. So if Drew tries to give it a go and he's not even necessarily 100%, but maybe 60%, 70%, do you maybe say, you know what, take a seat. Let's not make this worse. And part of that is you have a lot of confidence in Bo Prabula. Because, I mean, yeah, he's a backup, but I don't think there's many backup quarterbacks in college football that are going to come off the bench trailing in the second half at night at Camp Randall, not just come back and win, but come back and win easily. So I think there's a lot of faith in Bo as well. But again, they're going to see both. They're both going to play. And there's no way in the world James Franklin's going to let it be known to that first snap's taken if Drew Aller is going to play or not. But I expect them both to play. And honestly, I think that's a big positive for Penn State is where, if nothing else, you're forcing Ohio State this week to spend time prepping for both. And, that can just, the time that's spent, it can cause confusion on defense. There's a lot of positives that can come with that if you are Penn State.
And of course, Marty, to correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm saying this on a smaller sample size than what you see Penn State, of course. But Drew Aller has shown willingness to take off and run this year, I think a little bit more than in the past.
Yes, I think that's a big reason why you've seen the running game kind of return to where it was 2 years ago, because everybody knew Sean Clifford wasn't afraid to tuck the ball and go. And Drew hasn't done that at the rate Clifford did it, but he's done it a lot more this year, which has made a big difference because defensive ends and outside linebackers, whoever's sitting the edge for the defense, has had to respect his legs more, which has helped open up more running lanes for the running backs. And even more than that, one of the things that's made Drew so good this year, the USC game being a great example of this, is his improved mobility in the pocket, moving around, not locking onto guys, going through his progressions, using his feet to keep the play alive. So again, that's where you have to wonder where, even if it's not just straight up as a runner, but his ability to move around in the pocket, if his knee or ankle, whatever it is hindering that, then you have to wonder, okay, yes, when healthy, you're our best quarterback, but do you give us our best chance to win today? I think that's going to be the main conversation that needs to be had on Saturday.
Folks, we've got a book release that we're proud of here at the Voice of College Football. So this is the book that we just released today, this being Tuesday. So it's Disputed National Champions. It's my look at the 1990s, which I consider to be the most formative and impactful decade of college football in regards to determining how we determine a championship, because, of course, we went from the polls and the bowl coalition was introduced, and then, of course, the BCS, which led into the playoff era. So this is not just a history book, even though we go through every season and we break down the scenarios, the storylines, the major players in the national championship race, the rankings, how the postseason was set up, how it played out. Did somebody get ripped off? All those things. And then the impact of that season on future seasons and future teams. But we also take the results of all these seasons and we put them ahead into the BCS era to what would have looked like the 12 team playoff, the 14 playoff, of course, that we saw for the last 10 years. So it's a fun book about a lot of projections and so forth. And there were no conference championship games when this decade started. And we even plug in the conference championship games. Like this is what the conference championship game would have been. So it's just a fun book if you love to debate and argue college football. And of course, 1994, that may ring a bell. There's some debate there. May want to look at that too. All right.
When you said about debating on teams that may or may not have been snubbed, that's the first place my mind went, was that 1994 team. So
yes,
I'm sure there's a lot of people listening right now whose minds went there as well.
And so the link's right in the description section, right at the top. So thank you, and give that a thought. And speaking of psychology and all of that, I don't know that it plays into this in regards to Penn State players moping around in the third quarter if they're down 17-10, thinking, here we go again, or something like that. I think they're pretty, I give these college athletes, at least, especially at places that play that caliber football, a lot of credit for resilience and so forth. So I don't know that the history of this series will impact this at all.
Yeah, I don't think so, especially because one thing about this year's team that seems to be very unique and just maybe a little bit different from some past teams under Franklin. Not saying other teams weren't, mentally tough and that sort of thing, because they were, but this is a team that has faced some serious adversity the last couple of weeks. And I feel like in past years under James Franklin, they might not lose both those games, but they're definitely at least 6-1 right now, I feel. And to overcome a just disastrous first half at USC and to just come back swinging in the second half and dominate the second half and storm back and win that game the way they did. And then against Wisconsin, again, I understand Wisconsin's not a great team this year, but they were playing with a lot of momentum. It's nighttime at Camp Randall. I don't care who you are. Nighttime at Camp Randall is not something you ever want to be involved in. They were losing at the half. They'd lost their quarterback. You'd lost probably your third best defensive player in Dennis Sutton. And again, they come storming back and win it going away. Like ultimately that game wasn't as close as the final score indicated. So I think this is a very resilient, very mentally tough group. Every time they have faced adversity, they have passed the test with flying colors now. So yeah, I don't think that's going to be a factor this weekend at all. Because I think if they're trailing in the third or fourth quarter, I think it's going to be a here we go again, but not a, oh, here we go again with Ohio State. It's going to be, hey, we've done it the last 2 weeks. We might as well make it 3 weeks in a row of rallying in the second half. And some of James Franklin's best teams, that's been a calling card, the second half teams. You go back to 2016 when they won the Big Ten, they were known as being a second half team. 2019 when they won 11-2 and won the Cotton Bowl, that was a second half team. So again, some of James's best teams, and I think this is a testament to him and his coaching staff and their ability to make adjustments at halftime, have been teams that come out and dominate the second half, and that's what they've done all year. So I think if they find themselves in that position on Saturday, like I said, if there is any here we go again, it's going to be a positive. Hey, we've done this 2 weeks in a row. We can make it 3 in a row where we come back and rally and win this.
It's another big noon between these two in regards to Fox, and all eyes across college football will be on this one. Marty Lee, Penn State Rivals. Check out his work there. Of course, Penn State Rivals with Marty right there. Enjoy the game, Marty, and I'm sure we will see you soon.
Absolutely, Mark. Should be a great one on Saturday. And like I said, so we'll talk soon.